Hi everyone, and welcome back to Age Gap Love Story. I'm Carrie.
I'm Alan.
And we are a married couple with a 32-and-a-half-year age difference, and we've been together since 1998. So today we're going to be talking about green flags and red flags in an age gap relationship. And I think the interesting thing is that I'm just kind of assuming, but most of the people who follow us or who are interested in videos and our discussions are people who aren't necessarily looking for an age gap relationship, but they, through circumstances, meet their partner, their soulmate, and then there happens to be a large age difference. That is what happened with us. Now, I know there are also people who are seeking relationships with partners older or younger. I feel like we're less about that. We're more about
It just happened.
Yeah, it happened, and now what do I do?
Yeah, and often what happens when there is that age gap and it just happens, either the younger person or the older person or both are afraid to pursue it, even though there is a spark there, because it's an unusual situation and they're fearful of it.
Right. There's just so many things, usually around societal issues, I think, but also maybe concerns about the future, and because it is a different type of scenario, it's not usual. And that's the whole reason why we started the channel, is because we wanted to offer support, resources, community. And I know I always mention this, but we do have a private Facebook group. We're also on Instagram, and we're posting kind of here and there on TikTok. I find that the comments on TikTok can get out of control. We're kind of, because we've been together for so long, a lot of that stuff just rolls off of our back. And so when people make really rude comments, it's just not that big of a deal. And in a way, it's kind of a learning opportunity, I guess, to respond to that and showcase how much discrimination there is still. And that's the whole reason, I guess, in other words, because we've been together so long, we're not necessarily afraid of people saying really mean things because we've been through it, and it's not going to deter us from our next, it's not going to deter us from our relationship.
Right. And for those of you who are not familiar with how long we've been together, it's been about 27 years, all but 5 of that we've been married.
Right.
Before that, we were still virtually a couple, because it was like, when we met each other, it was like, bing, and we talked every day. And then a little bit later, we saw each other every day, and we lived together for a while, and then we got married.
Yeah, but I guess my point is, what I was saying is that we are willing to put ourselves out there in kind of like the public sphere, I guess, to help better increase awareness, I guess, about age gap relationships. So we don't want other people to have to feel ashamed or
Suffer.
afraid. Yeah. So I guess we're just trying to help maybe bring some positive awareness.
Yeah, not to say we're encouraging age gap relationships.
Or hatred.
Yeah, one or the other. It's just, we want you to know, if it happens, here are some tips on how to move forward.
Right. So all that is to say, I thought today's topic would be kind of interesting. Green flags and red flags. If you're not familiar with those terms, if you're like not an American or whatever, we call a green flag, I guess, refers to kind of traffic signals where green is go, red is stop. And so green flag is like,
this looks good.
Yeah. And a red flag is stop. So we have some personal green flags and red flags, but I thought also just kind of generally for relationships and also age gap relationships specifically, that we would share some red flags and green flags. So maybe we'll do the general ones first, and then we can maybe talk about when we were dating, what our personal green and red flags were. So I think one of the most important ones for age gap relationships and all relationships is that you share similar values. And I think that could be around anything. It could be around life and goals and how you want to run your daily life. What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, people can be different slants as far as politics, religion, a lot of different things. But if they can adapt and accept the other's point of view, that's great. However, if you can't, that would definitely be a red flag. If somebody has one political view and the other has a different, and they disagree and argue about it, anything that leads to disagreement is generally a red flag. However, had a couple that we were very close to, my nearest and dearest friend who passed away several years ago. He and his wife would argue about the most ridiculous things. Well, last time we went to this restaurant, you turned left here. No, we turn right. No, we turn left. I mean, they would just go at it hammer and tong over the most ridiculous things. Red flag. If you argue about things that are inconsequential, that is not a good start to a relationship.
Yeah, I think also since Alan and I have been together for so long, and you want your relationship, like let's say you have a goal that you want a long-term relationship, and we're just kind of assuming that because we assume that you're here because you want to know how to make your relationship successful for the long term. And sometimes, like I said, because we've been together so long, we're going through our lives together. So that means everything from going to get groceries, preparing meals, like we have pets. So,
Doing nice things for each other.
but I'm talking about like, you have to remember your partner, you're going to be going through life together. So that means good things and bad things
Right.
and mundane things.
Right.
And
The word partner, I think, is key there.
yeah,
And all of this may sound a little cold hearted because I've been in business for so many years, and most of those years were in sales and marketing. When I started dating, I gave it a lot of thought, and it was like the sales prospect, the sales process, where you do your prospecting and you find a suspect, that is somebody or something that you think is going to work. Qualify by gathering information, moving the suspect to the prospect. And then when they're a prospect, you do further research and qualification to move them to a customer or to close the deal. And dating is kind of like that. One of the first things, as Carrie said, you want to determine is if you have an interest in somebody, are they looking for a long-term relationship? Because many people aren't. They don't want it. And if that's the case, you're going to be heartbroken if you pursue it and it's not reciprocated by the other party. So that's one big issue right there. And then getting to know somebody is that qualification process. Do you have a lot of likes and dislikes that are similar? Are you happy together? Is the other person kind and giving and generous? And is that something you need from the other person? Maybe you don't need that.
so I think when we're talking about age gap relationships, we have to also, like when you're talking about like a shared vision or shared values. So that is despite, like, you can still have differences because you will, because you're from different generations. But that really, a lot of that just didn't matter when Alan and I got together. The age difference, it almost like it didn't matter or it wasn't there. So when it came to things, and like Alan said, you don't have to agree on things like politics, but the fact that we did,
Helped.
it, I think it helped a lot. I mean, that's my opinion. I would rather, I know they say like opposites attract. In my case, I felt like we agreed on so many things. Now, over the years, I've introduced Alan to my frame of reference, like toys from my childhood. I would say, "Do you remember this?" And he's like, "No." Or cartoons, things like silly things. But that's not that important that he remembers that or he knows a silly cartoon. But on bigger matters, it was just very easy.
When I first met Carrie, I love old movies and old TV shows. When I first met Carrie, she did not want to watch a movie that was in black and white. However,
I still don't like it that much.
well, but I introduced her to the Marx Brothers and all of their movies. Many of them made in the 1930s were all black and white. And she loved the Marx Brothers. And so that was sort of an introduction to liking black and white movies. But anyway, there are a lot of things from my generation that I introduced Carrie to, and she, from her generation, introduced me to.
Yeah. So
Uh,
that in that way was kind of fun. And it
yeah,
made life richer, I think.
I agree.
Anyways, so I think another green flag is that you can just be yourself. in the relationship. And certainly when you're dating, you're usually like the best version of yourself. But
And when you're older, you don't play games. Like if you meet somebody and you like them, you call them, you pursue them. You don't like wait a week to make them think that you're not interested,
yeah,
so they're excited when you call back. Those games you do in high school or maybe in college, but when you're older, you just don't want to waste the time. If you like somebody, you want them to know it, and if they know it and they like you, then they'll return and reciprocate the enjoyment of your company. That's the name of the game.
yeah. And I think because I always want to bring it back to the context of an age gap relationship, the idea that you can be who you are is that you can do that in spite of your age. So even though I was 23 when I met Alan and he was 55, he never made me feel immature or stupid or anything like that. I mean, I wasn't, but I'm sure I was less mature than I am now. But I never felt like that. I never felt belittled or anything like that. And never. I don't. I've always tried to be. I don't know. I've never like made fun of you for your age or anything like that. So I think that that's important because that the age difference is going to be there. So it doesn't make sense to throw it in somebody's face.
Yes, it does.
Okay, our neighbor is vacuuming his car right now. By the way, I have new microphones on order, so hopefully going forward, our audio will be better because I do put the audio of these videos on podcast platforms, and I noticed that it sounded not very good. So hopefully going forward, it'll be better if you prefer to use a podcast to listen. Another green flag for relationships in general, I think, is that you grow together, not apart. So the longer you're together, you're taking on new things together because I think no matter where you are in life, you're going to continue growing and changing and evolving, hopefully for the better. I think it's important that you do that together. So whether it's a hobby or I don't know,
Well,
different interests.
yes, you begin to share interests, more
Yeah.
interests than initially as you grow together. And that also, if the other person has interests that the other person is not crazy about, you allow them to pursue it. You don't stifle your mate and tell them not to do something because you're not interested. That's a red flag right there.
A red flag for an age gap relationship is I think you hear about this a lot, but when you have unequal like a power dynamic within the relationship, I think that can happen. I've heard about this in when you meet somebody at work, no matter the age difference, that if somebody has a higher level at work or whatever that's called, position at work, that can create like a uneven power dynamic. And that's not what you want in a relationship because each person should have equal footing. I will say we've often, but occasionally in age gap relationships where one partner, usually the younger one, is maybe from a different country, usually a poorer country than, let's say, the United States. And I think that sometimes that is a red flag for me when I hear people talking about that. Like they're bringing in, they met somebody maybe through an online situation and are bringing that person into the country. And there's usually some, I think, financial involved there. And I think that that could be a red flag.
Yeah, plus that adds a whole new element of cultural differences. So that could create additional problems. Going back to the comments I made earlier about interviewing, getting to know the other person as part of that qualifying or prospecting process. If the one of the two parties or both have been divorced, married and divorced previously, it would be wise to find out what their exes did to upset them, to drive them crazy, what moved them to dislike and divorce that person, and to be aware of those things. Say, gee, I have those traits, and so this is going to be a red flag down the road. If you know those things in advance, you can either analyze and maybe correct your behavior or think about it, or just say, that's the way I am, and I'm going to just cause the same problem for this person in a future relationship that they've had in their past relationship.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if we've ever discussed this before, but blaming not taking any responsibility for a previous divorce, I think could be a red flag. I will say that I don't know if, as Alan was divorced, I don't know that I think over time has been more open minded and accepting that he in the past hasn't been perfect. And like, you can't just blame everybody else for mistakes in the past. Like, even if, anyways, over time, you can maybe take more responsibility. And I guess that's a green flag if somebody is willing to learn
Admit
new,
mistakes.
yeah, admit mistakes and also learn new habits. And I think some other red flags with in regards to that unequal power dynamic that could potentially be within an age gap relationship is when somebody has more financial power, or somebody just always expects the other person to agree with their decisions. I'm just a very firm believer that in a relationship, both partners are really deserve equal footing. And so if you don't feel like that in your relationship, whether it's age gap or not, I just think that that's a red flag.
Yes, and as to the financial aspect, if the junior or less financially secure person is not made to feel secure financially in a new relationship, then that could lead to problems. And I think it's important once you decide you really want to be with that person that you make an effort to make them feel financially secure.
I want to just mention one thing, and that's in regards to family or social acceptance. Some people might say that that's a red flag. I personally do not think it's a red flag that other people don't want to accept your relationship. Because I think that's unfair. I think that is a bias in our society, and that's what we're trying to fight against. And so, I mean, it can definitely be an issue, don't get me wrong, and it can cause a lot of problems. So it's something to address, but I don't see it as a red flag. And I think, in my opinion, based on my experience, I think that is a time for setting a boundary where you, as an adult, assuming that you're over adult age, wherever you live, I think that's a time for you to learn how to set boundaries, that this is your own life and you have the right to make your own decision with whom you choose to be with. And I really believe that.
Right. You don't want to let somebody else make your life decisions for you. I mean, it's important. You don't want to offend mother, father, sister, brother, whatever the case may be. But on the other hand, you have your life to live and they have their life to live. And you can certainly listen to them and understand their advice and their concern and thank them for it, and then do what you think is best for you.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot in other episodes. And if you are dependent on your family financially, let's say you're in school or something like that, these are kind of intricacies that you're going to have to figure out for yourself, for your own individual situation. But I do believe once you're an adult, that you are entitled to make adult decisions. And so, that can include being with somebody older if that's what you want. But then you're going to have to take on the responsibilities of those decisions as
Yeah,
well.
right or wrong.
So I thought maybe we could talk about some of our personal green flags. This is kind of going back a long time ago because it's been almost 30 years since Alan and I met each other. But I for sure recall that when I met him, this probably has to do with his age, but the men that I was dating they didn't seem like they were ready to settle down. And I did date a few older men, not as old as Alan, but I did, and even those men were not really interested in settling down. There just wasn't a feeling of wanting to be committed. And I really did not like that. And then when I met Alan, I don't know if you told me outright, but he gave me a lot of he gave me a lot of green flags that he wanted to see me more. And at the end of our dates, we would usually make a plan for another time to see each other.
I think
So,
one thing that Carrie likes to remind me of is that when we started dating, it was in the summer. It was in July, and I said, "What are you doing New Year's?"
yeah. So, but
The
I
clue.
really like that. It was like a feeling of stability, of commitment, of reliability. Also, it was very important to me that the person I dated was trustworthy. Now, that took time to know that Alan was a trustworthy person, but he always proved himself to be so. And then I think also just his happy demeanor. He wasn't moody, and he continues to always see the bright side. I would say 99% of the time, he is this kind of fun, happy, silly, nice person that he comes across on video, and that is how he is. And that those are green flags for me.
Okay.
Do you want to share your green flags?
I think my green flags with Carrie were not to demean my previous wife, but there are a lot of things that Carrie did and did not do that were issues that I had with my ex-wife. I mean, as wonderful as she was, and she had many great traits, but there were just things that she did that really bothered me. And Carrie was absent the traits that bothered me and had the traits that I was longing for.
Also, we were just compatible too,
Yeah,
which is something that you guys
we
weren't.
just really enjoyed being together. No matter what we did, it was just fun to be together. We would just sit on the little love seat that I had in my first bachelor apartment after I separated from my wife. Actually, it was about a year and a half after I separated her, 2 years. And we would watch TV and just cuddle, and it was just great to be together. We didn't really even talk. We just, watch TV, or Carrie would read and whatever. So I don't know how to describe the green flags other than the way I've already done so.
Yeah, like a compatibility, an ease of being together.
And Carrie made an effort. She lived about 30, 40 minutes away from where my apartment was. She made an effort to drive from where she lived after work to come out and see me. I mean, she made that effort. And on weekends, it was just very positive.
Yeah, it was a really sweet time. I would say, looking back on our dating time.
Was and is. And now she
Yeah.
doesn't have to drive at all.
And I think that if you guys watching, if you feel that sweetness with your
warmth.
partner, yeah, and almost like you're in your own world together, just the two of you, what other people think really doesn't mean anything. And if you feel like that you're just like in this you have this special bond, I think that's a really great green flag. And that's what we felt, and that we still feel even to this day.
I said, if you enjoy being with somebody, you can do or not do just about anything and still be happy.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think that wraps up today's episode. We hope you'll subscribe, and then we'll see you in a future video. Take care, everyone.
Bye.